My name is Michelle Cole. I'm 31 years old. And until recently, I thought I was standing on solid ground. Not perfect, not glamorous, but steady in the quiet, grown-up way that comes from paying bills on time, planning a wedding with color-coded spreadsheets, and believing, truly believing, that the person beside you is building toward the same future. I'd been with Robert for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. We moved into our 2-bedroom apartment a little over 2 years ago, the kind with decent light, thin walls, and just enough space to imagine a life expanding forward. The guest room had already been mentally converted into a nursery someday, or a home office, or a place for visiting family during the holidays we kept promising we'd host. The lease, though, that was in my name alone. Not because I wanted control, not because I didn't trust him, but because Robert's credit history looked like it had been assembled during a bad year and then forgotten. We'd agreed, together, that I'd handle the lease. He'd contribute his half from his freelance work. And mostly, it worked. Mostly. 3 weeks ago, after dinner, he sat across from me at the table with that expression I've since learned to recognize. The "I'm about to ask you something unreasonable, but I'm going to say it like it's common sense" look. "Hey," he said carefully, not meeting my eyes, "can we talk about something?" I set my fork down. My chest tightened, not panic, just instinct. "Okay," I said. He picked at the edge of his plate, then at a chip in the nail polish on his thumb. "So, my ex called me yesterday." That was it. That was the moment. That subtle internal click when your body knows before your mind catches up. "Your ex," I repeated, slow and flat. "Yeah, he rushed ahead. "It's been years. We're friends now. Nothing weird." I didn't respond. I waited. "She's having a really hard time," he continued. "Her startup collapsed. She lost her apartment. She's basically living out of her car right now." I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms. Not defensively, just grounding myself. "And?" I asked. He finally looked up. "I was wondering, maybe she could stay in our guest room, just for a few weeks, until she gets back on her feet." The words landed softly, too softly, like he'd practiced them. I stared at him. The guest room. The room where our wedding boxes were stacked. The room with the spare bed we'd joked about upgrading after the honeymoon. The room that existed inside the life we were building. "You want your ex-girlfriend," I said, choosing each word carefully, "to move into our apartment." "She's not my ex like that," he said quickly. "She's just someone I care about. She has no one else." "Then why is she calling you?" I asked quietly, "when her life falls apart?" The shift in his expression was immediate, defensive, irritated. "Because I'm a good person, Michelle," he snapped. "Because I don't abandon people when things get hard. God, I didn't think you'd be so insecure about this." There it was. The word that shuts conversations down. Insecure. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not anger yet, but something close. I thought about all the times I'd been the calm one, the reasonable one, the one who swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. I grew up in a house where every disagreement turned into a shouting match. Doors slammed, voices raised. I promised myself I'd never live like that, so when conflict comes, I don't explode. I go quiet. And that night I went very quiet. I looked at Robert, really looked at him. This man I'd supported through career pivots, who I'd covered rent for when invoices ran late, who I'd defended to my friends when they asked why I always seemed to be the responsible one. And now he was asking me to prove my love by sacrificing my comfort, while making me feel unreasonable for hesitating. Something shifted. I can't explain it cleanly. It wasn't rage, it wasn't heartbreak, it was clarity. "You know what?" I said, my voice calm to the point of eeriness. "If it means that much to you, she can stay." His face lit up like I'd handed him a gift. "Really?" he said, relief flooding his tone. "Oh my God. Thank you. I knew you'd understand." He stood, came around the table, hugged me tight. I hugged him back. And while he held me, already celebrating his victory, I started planning. I didn't say anything else that night. I didn't argue. I didn't set conditions. I didn't ask for reassurance. Because I'd realized something important. If I said no, I'd be the villain. If I said yes, I'd be free to choose what happened next. And he had no idea. Robert acted lighter after that conversation, almost buoyant. Like he'd just dodged a bullet he didn't even realize he'd fired. The next morning, he was humming in the kitchen while making coffee. An unconscious tell I'd learned over 4 years. Humming meant relief. Humming meant he thought the hard part was over. "Thank you again," he said casually, handing me a mug. "I know that wasn't easy." I nodded, took a sip, burned my tongue slightly, didn't react. What I didn't say was that the hard part hadn't even started. What I didn't say was that my agreement hadn't been forgiveness. It had been confirmation. Because now I was watching. Robert texted his ex immediately. I could tell by how quickly his mood shifted from careful to energized. He angled his phone away from me, not dramatically, just enough to signal privacy. Another small data point. "She's so relieved," he said later, unprompted. "You really saved her, you know." Saved her. Not we, you. The word settled somewhere unpleasant in my chest. Over the next 2 days, I noticed how the story evolved every time he retold it. At first it was, "I asked Michelle if it was okay." Then, Michelle totally understood. By the third retelling, to his sister on speakerphone, it became, "Michelle actually suggested it. She's just like that." I didn't correct him. That night, lying beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling while he slept easily, I replayed the conversation that had brought us here, not just what he said, but how quickly he'd turned my discomfort into a character flaw. Insecure, jealous, unkind. It was subtle, always subtle. Robert never yelled, never demanded outright. He framed everything as logic, morality, reason. If I pushed back, I wasn't disagreeing. I was failing a test. I'd seen this pattern before, though I hadn't named it until then. Kindness, when weaponized, stops being kindness. The next evening I tried once, just once, to recalibrate. "So," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "what's the plan, timeline-wise?" "For what?" he asked. "For her staying here." "Oh, I mean, until she's stable," he said vaguely. "A few weeks, month, maybe." "A month?" I repeated. "Well, you know how the job market is," he added. "I don't want to pressure her when she's already fragile." "Pressure her?" I leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely. "And what about us?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Our space, our routine, our boundaries." There it was, that flicker of irritation again. The sense that I was complicating something simple. "Michelle," he said patiently, "I thought we already talked about this. I thought you were okay with it." "I said she could stay," I replied. "I didn't say I stopped having feelings about it." He exhaled sharply. "So now I'm not allowed to help someone without it turning into a whole thing?" I watched the conversation slide off the rails in real time. "No," I said slowly. "I'm saying I want clarity." "And I'm saying you're overthinking," he shot back. "God, I don't know why everything has to be analyzed to death." There it was again, my need for clarity recast as dysfunction. I went quiet. Not because I didn't have more to say, but because I finally understood something fundamental. Robert didn't see this as our problem to navigate together. He saw it as my emotional obstacle to overcome. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up the lease. My name. Only my name. I reread the clauses slowly. Termination notice, occupancy rules, unauthorized residence. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I felt awake. The next morning, while Robert was in the shower, I stepped onto the balcony and called my landlord. "Hey," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something hypothetical." He listened, asked questions, then answered plainly. And with every sentence, the ground beneath me grew steadier. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Back inside, Robert came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said easily. "Everything's fine." And for the first time in weeks, that was true. Just not in the way he thought. The strange thing about clarity is how quiet it is. No dramatic music, no shaking hands, no racing thoughts, just a calm, almost clinical awareness of what needs to be done next. After my call with the landlord, I didn't cry. I didn't confront Robert. I didn't demand promises or timelines or reassurances that I already knew wouldn't hold. I started preparing. Carefully, invisibly. Robert, meanwhile, was in a good mood. Lighter than I'd seen him in months. He texted constantly, his phone never more than a few inches from his hand. When I walked into a room, conversations paused. Not abruptly, just enough. "She's driving in on Thursday," he said one night, spearing a piece of chicken. "I told her not to worry about anything. We've got it handled." "We." I nodded. "Okay." He smiled, relieved again. That wordless gratitude for my compliance. Over the next few days, I began to separate my life from the apartment in ways only someone who knows the space intimately can. Important documents first. Passport, social security card, birth certificate, old tax files. I slid them into a slim folder and tucked it into my work bag, where it wouldn't draw attention. Then small personal things. A sweater here, a pair of boots there, jewelry I wore often enough that its absence wouldn't be noticed immediately. I boxed up books, my books, and labeled them for donation. A lie, but a useful one. They went straight into the trunk of my car instead. Robert didn't notice. He was too busy preparing for her. The guest room transformed in under 48 hours. Fresh sheets, new pillows, a small lamp he moved from the living room because, in his words, she likes softer light. He remembered things about her. That fact landed heavier than it should have. "She's really excited to see you," he said casually one evening. "She said it means a lot that you're okay with this." I looked up from my phone. "Did she ask?" He hesitated. "Well, she knows it's your place, too." Another subtle shift. "Your place, too." I smiled thinly. "I'm sure she does." On Wednesday night, I stayed late at work on purpose. I needed the space, the distance, time to think without his presence reframing everything. When I came home, Robert was on the couch, laptop open, deep in conversation. He glanced up. "Hey, sorry, didn't hear you come in." I nodded toward the screen. "That her?" He didn't deny it. "Yeah, she's kind of freaking out about the drive." I went into the bedroom and closed the door. That night, lying awake, I thought about all the moments I'd ignored over the years. How often I'd been the stable one so he could drift. How many times my flexibility had become an expectation instead of a gift. And I thought about something else too. How peace doesn't always come from fixing things. Sometimes it comes from leaving them alone to collapse under their own weight. Thursday morning, I made coffee like usual, kissed Robert on the cheek before work, told him I might be late. "Okay," he said absently. "She should be here by early evening." She. Not my ex, not the guest, just she. At lunch, I drove to a storage facility 10 minutes from my office and signed a month-to-month contract. Small unit, climate-controlled, no fuss. I felt oddly calm loading the first box into it that afternoon, like I was moving pieces on a board that had already shown me the endgame. By the time I got home that evening, her car was already there. A battered sedan parked crookedly in my spot. Inside, I heard laughter. Her laughter. I stepped through the doorway and saw them in the living room. Standing too close, talking too fast, energy buzzing between them like it had never left. She turned first, mid-30s, tired eyes, confident smile. "Oh," she said brightly, "you must be Michelle." I smiled back. "I am." She hugged me without waiting for permission. Robert watched, relieved. "Thanks again," she said warmly. "You have no idea what this means to me." I believed her, and that was the problem, because meaning doesn't create entitlement. That night, after polite conversation and forced normalcy, I lay in bed listening to their voices drift from the living room long after Robert said he was tired. I didn't interrupt, I didn't announce myself. I watched the ceiling, counted breaths, and finalized the timeline in my head. 10 days. That's all I needed. And they had no idea the countdown had already begun. Living with someone you don't trust is like sharing a room with a ticking clock. You hear it even when everything else is quiet. The first morning after she moved in, I woke up early out of habit. The apartment smelled different. Stronger coffee, something sweet and artificial underneath it. Vanilla creamer, not mine. I lay still listening. Low voices in the kitchen. Robert's laugh, soft, unguarded. The kind I hadn't heard in a while. I got dressed slowly, deliberately. When I walked out, they both turned toward me at the same time, like they'd rehearsed it. "Morning," she said, overly cheerful. "Hey," Robert added. She made coffee. I looked at the mug in his hand. My mug. "Thanks," I said. "I'll make my own." An awkward beat passed. Then conversation resumed, a little louder than necessary. Performative normalcy. That became the rhythm of the days that followed. She didn't do anything overt. No crossed lines that could be pointed to and labeled. That was almost worse. Instead, there were moments. Patterns. Micro adjustments in space and time. She always seemed to be wherever Robert was. If he was in the living room, she was on the couch. If he stepped onto the balcony, she followed with a cigarette she claimed she was trying to quit. If he cooked dinner, she hovered at the counter, offering suggestions, reminiscing about meals they used to make together. I noticed how rarely he corrected her. Late at night, when I'd already gone to bed, I'd hear their voices again. Low, intimate. The kind of conversations people have when they believe no one else is listening. I never said anything. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I observed. On the fourth night, I walked out to get water around midnight. They were sitting close on the couch, knees almost touching. The TV was on, volume low, forgotten. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly, scooting away just enough to be defensible. Robert stood. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, "just thirsty." I filled my glass, took a sip, and went back to bed. My heart wasn't racing, my hands weren't shaking. That scared me more than anger would have. By day 5, she had opinions. About how the dishwasher should be loaded. About the thermostat. about the neighbor downstairs who always annoyed Robert. By day 6, she'd started leaving her things everywhere. Shoes by the door, makeup on the bathroom counter, laundry in the hamper, our hamper. By day 7, she'd stopped asking before using things. That night, I overheard her laugh and say, "God, it's so weird being back like this." Back. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. That word echoed louder than any argument could have. Robert didn't notice my withdrawal, or maybe he did, and chose not to see it. He kissed me absent-mindedly, thanked me again for being cool. Being cool. That was the role he'd assigned me. The accommodating fiancé, the reasonable woman, the one who didn't make things messy. What he didn't realize was that my silence wasn't submission. It was inventory. By day 10, everything I needed was out of the apartment. The storage unit was half full. My documents were secure. A spare room at a friend's place was confirmed. The letter to the landlord sat drafted in my email, ready to send. All that remained was timing. The morning I chose was unremarkable. Robert left early for a meeting. She slept in, door closed, oblivious. I moved through the apartment one last time, slow and steady. I took what was left of myself. I left what I no longer wanted. Keys on the counter, a single note, no explanations beyond facts. When I closed the door behind me, the click of the lock sounded final. Not dramatic, just done. And as I walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. I didn't cry when I pulled out of the parking lot. I noticed that immediately, like an anomaly worth recording. No tears, no shaking hands on the steering wheel, just a steady awareness that I was doing something irreversible and that I was okay with that. I drove straight to work, parked in my usual spot, and sat there for a moment longer than necessary. The world hadn't ended. No alarms went off. My phone stayed quiet. For now, I went through the day on autopilot, answered emails, sat through a meeting I barely remembered afterward, ate lunch without tasting it. Every so often, my mind replayed the image of the keys on the counter, the note beside them. Not dramatically placed, not hidden either. Plain, unmistakable. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone started vibrating. Once, twice, then again. I didn't answer. The first voicemail came in less than a minute later. "Hey, Michelle, what's going on? I just got home and your closet's half empty. Did you go somewhere? Call me." I imagined him standing in the bedroom, scanning the shelves, opening drawers, like the contents might rearrange themselves if he looked hard enough. The second voicemail followed quickly. "This isn't funny. If you're trying to prove a point, you've made it. Just call me back, okay?" By the third, his voice had sharpened. "Are you seriously doing this over nothing? You said you were okay with her staying. You can't just disappear." Disappear. As if I'd evaporated. As if I hadn't been right there the whole time, watching, absorbing, deciding. I didn't respond. An hour later, the tone changed. "Michelle, I just talked to the landlord. He said you're terminating the lease. What the hell is wrong with you?" There it was. The panic, finally breaking through. I pictured the scene clearly. Robert pacing. Her standing nearby, arms crossed, listening. The sudden realization that the ground beneath them wasn't solid after all. I muted my phone. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I woke up to missed calls from numbers I didn't have saved. His mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hello?" "Michelle," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "Honey, I know you're upset, but you can't just abandon Robert like this. He's devastated." Abandon. Interesting word choice. "He's not abandoned," I said calmly. "He has company." A pause. "That girl is just a friend going through a hard time." "Then she can go through it somewhere else," I replied. "I'm not responsible for housing her, or him." Her tone hardened. "You're being heartless. 4 years together and this is how you handle conflict?" "I handled it," I said. "Just not the way you wanted." She told me I'd regret it. That I'd thrown away something rare. That I wouldn't find anyone who loved me the way her son did. I let her talk until she ran out of words. When she finally stopped, I said, "Are you done? I have to get back to work." She hung up without saying goodbye. By Saturday, the messages had multiplied. His sister sent a long text about communication and maturity, about how I'd blindsided him, how adults don't run away when things get uncomfortable. I replied once. I communicated my concerns. I was told I was insecure, so I removed myself from the situation. That's not running away. I was blocked minutes later. Monday morning, the landlord called. "Just wanted to keep you in the loop," he said. "I spoke to Robert about taking over the lease. He doesn't qualify. Credit's not great, and there's no steady income." I closed my eyes, leaned back in my chair. And the guest? I asked. He laughed once, short and humorless. Unauthorized occupant. She tried to argue tenant rights. Didn't go well. Apparently, she'd gotten on the phone too, demanding extensions, threatening lawyers. The landlord, a man who'd been in this business longer than I'd been alive, was unimpressed. They've got until the end of the month, he said. Then I start eviction. That night, Robert texted from a new number. Thanks a lot. Now we're being thrown out. Hope you're happy. I didn't respond, but I was. Not in a gloating way, not with satisfaction at their distress. I was happy because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying someone else's consequences, and that felt like freedom. I thought silence would end it. That once Robert understood I wasn't coming back, once the landlord made things real, everyone would eventually adjust. Get angry, get sad, get practical. I underestimated how far people will go to avoid responsibility. The first sign came Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after I left. I was in a conference room at work, half listening to a budget review, when my phone buzzed twice in quick succession. A coworker leaned over and whispered, "Hey, there's a guy asking for you at reception. Says it's urgent." My stomach dropped. I already knew. When I stepped into the lobby, I saw Robert pacing near the front desk, hair uncombed, eyes red-rimmed. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. The confidence he'd worn so easily in our apartment was gone. The receptionist gave me a questioning look. "I told him you were in a meeting," she whispered. "He wouldn't leave." Robert spotted me and rushed forward. "Michelle, thank God, you have to talk to me." "This isn't appropriate," I said quietly. "Please," he insisted. "Just 5 minutes. You can't do this to me." I felt eyes on us. Curious. Uncomfortable. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said evenly. "I made a decision about my own lease. You need to leave." He shook his head, voice cracking. "She has nowhere else to go. And now the landlord's threatening eviction. You knew this would happen." I looked at him then, really looked, and felt something settle into place. "No," I said. "I knew something would happen. I just stopped making sure it wouldn't." Security arrived moments later, calm, professional. They asked Robert to leave. He didn't go quietly. "You're ruining my life," he shouted as they escorted him out. "You just don't want to admit you were jealous." Jealous, even now. My boss pulled me aside afterward. I gave him the short version. Relationship ended, boundaries crossed. He nodded, sympathetic, and told me to let him know if it happened again. That weekend, the ex tried a different approach. She didn't call. She didn't text. She sent a LinkedIn request. I stared at the screen, equal parts incredulous and impressed by the audacity. "Hey, Michelle, I think things got misunderstood. I'd love to clear the air sometime. Also, if you could talk to the landlord about extending the move-out date, that would really help us figure things out. U.S." I declined the request without responding. The following day, Robert's mother called again, this time without pretense. "You selfish, spiteful woman," she began. "My son gave you years of his life." "I paid for the apartment," I replied calmly, "and I removed myself from a situation I didn't consent to." "You agreed," she snapped. "I agreed because saying no would have made me the villain either way," I said. "At least this way, I'm free." She went on for 10 minutes, about loyalty, about forgiveness, about how no one would ever love me the way Robert did. When she finally paused for breath, I asked, "Are you done?" She hung up. Midweek, the landlord called again. "They haven't moved," he said. "In fact, they've stopped pretending they're trying." Apparently, groceries were disappearing, bills unpaid, days passing without job applications submitted. They were waiting for me to step in, fix it, smooth it over. "I'm starting formal eviction," he said. "Just wanted to give you a heads up since your name was on the original lease." Abandonment, they claimed, that I'd left them without notice. I almost laughed. The eviction papers were served the next day. That night, I received one final message, sent from Robert's mother's phone. "You're doing this to punish him because you can't handle him caring about someone else. This is abuse. I'm documenting everything." I screenshot it and forwarded it to a lawyer friend. His reply came back within minutes. "Lol, no case. Removing yourself from a lease isn't abuse, it's moving out." I slept deeply that night, not because everything was resolved, but because the truth no longer required my participation. The eviction notice didn't arrive with drama. No shouting, no confrontation, no last-minute pleas at my door. Just paperwork. The landlord called me the morning after it was served, his voice steady, almost apologetic. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said. "Sheriff paperwork, 30 days, no extensions." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there for a long moment, phone resting in my lap, realizing how strange it felt to be this far removed from a disaster that used to be my responsibility. Because for years it had been. If something broke, I fixed it. If money ran short, I covered it. If emotions got complicated, I smoothed them over. Now none of that applied. Robert didn't call me after the papers were served. He sent screenshots instead. Photos of legal-looking documents, highlighted sections, a caption underneath. "This is real now. You happy?" I stared at the message, noticing how carefully it was framed. Not, "We need help." Not, "I'm scared." Just accusation. I didn't reply. That silence seemed to unhinge something. Over the next few days, mutual acquaintances began reaching out, people I hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, I heard things got really bad between you and Robert. Are you okay? He seems really shaken. He said you just left without warning." The story was already being rewritten. I kept my responses short, neutral, factual. I ended the relationship and removed myself from a lease I paid for. That's all there is to it. Some believed me, some didn't. I stopped caring which category they fell into. Then came the accusation. Not from Robert directly, but through his mother. Again, always his mother. This time, it was a long text message sent from yet another unfamiliar number. "You manipulated my son. You trapped him financially and then abandoned him when things got hard." That is emotional abuse, Michelle. I've spoken to people about this. We're documenting everything. I read it twice, slowly. The language was precise now, legal adjacent, deliberate. I forwarded it to my lawyer friend with a single line. "Still nothing?" His reply came back almost instantly. "Still nothing. She's bluffing. Let her document. Silence is your friend." So I stayed silent. The next call I got from the landlord came a week later. "They're claiming you promised to keep paying rent," he said. I shut that down. "Your paperwork is clean." "What about the ex?" I asked. A pause, then a dry chuckle. She tried to argue she's an implied tenant. I reminded her she moved in without permission. That conversation ended quickly. According to him, the mood in the apartment had shifted. No more entitlement, no more confidence. Just tension, blame. Two people stuck together with nowhere else to go. I imagined it clearly. Robert, pacing. Her, defensive. Both of them searching for someone else to fault. And finding only each other. The final message came late one night. From Robert himself. No insults, no anger, just desperation. "I don't understand how you could do this to me. I never thought you were capable of something so cruel." Cruel. I set the phone down and waited for the familiar ache to come. It didn't. What I felt instead was distance, plain and unmistakable. Because cruelty would have been staying, letting resentment rot into something uglier, teaching him that my boundaries were optional. I didn't ruin his life. I stopped protecting it from consequences. And that distinction mattered more than anything he could say. The sheriff didn't knock softly. That detail came to me secondhand through the landlord, who called me afterward with the kind of tone people use when they've seen something uncomfortable but inevitable. "Day 31, he said. They were still there." I closed my eyes. According to him, the ex-girlfriend answered the door first, hair unbrushed, voice sharp with indignation. She argued. She insisted there had been a misunderstanding. She asked for more time. Robert stayed behind her, silent. The papers were clear, the timeline exhausted, the patience gone. They were given minutes, not hours, to gather what they could carry. The rest would be considered abandoned. "I thought you should know," the landlord said, "since you were part of this for so long." "I appreciate it," I replied, and I meant it. After the call, I sat at my desk and stared out the window. Traffic moved below, ordinary and indifferent. Somewhere a door was closing on a chapter I'd already left. I didn't feel triumph. I felt finality. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. I recognized the cadence immediately. "I hope you're satisfied. Robert is devastated. She's gone. He's alone. You broke him." His mother, one last attempt to assign ownership of pain. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Then I wrote, "He had a partner who loved him. He chose to prioritize someone else. The consequences aren't mine to carry." I sent it. There was no reply. In the weeks that followed, pieces of information filtered to me through the cracks of shared acquaintances and loose connections. Robert moved back in with his parents. His mother was furious, not at him, but at me. She told anyone who would listen that I'd been cold, controlling, emotionally unavailable. I let the story live without correction. The people who knew me already understood. The rest were never going to. The ex-girlfriend bounced between couches. Friends at first, then friends of friends. Each stay shorter than the last. Apparently, compassion has limits when it's asked to bankroll someone else's life. Her social media still listed her as a founder, a visionary. I blocked it after that. As for me, I downsized quietly. A studio apartment not far from work. White walls, clean lines, just enough space for what I actually needed. I returned the engagement ring and put the money straight into savings. Lost the wedding deposits. That part stung more than I expected. Not the cost, but the future they represented. There were nights I questioned myself. Late ones, quiet ones. Did I overreact? Should I have talked more? Was leaving the coward's choice? But then I remembered the ease with which my boundaries had been dismissed, how quickly my discomfort had been labeled insecurity, how naturally my sacrifice had been assumed. I hadn't run. I had walked away from something that no longer honored me. The landlord told me recently that new tenants moved in. Young couple, both names on the lease, both employed. Good for them. As for me, I'm not rushing anything. Not dating, not rebuilding trust on someone else's timeline. I'm learning how to be alone without feeling lonely, and that's harder than it sounds. But it's honest. And honesty, I've learned, is quieter than chaos. It doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it just stands firm and lets everything else reveal itself. Time has a way of sanding the sharpest memories down to their edges. Not erasing them, just making them easier to hold. 6 weeks passed after the eviction. Long enough for the adrenaline to fade. Long enough for the noise to die down. Long enough for me to stop bracing every time my phone buzzed. I didn't hear from Robert again. Not directly, but I heard about him. A mutual friend mentioned, carefully, that he wasn't doing well. That moving back in with his parents had been tense. That his mother monitored everything. His schedule, his job search, his moods, as if control might substitute for stability. Another friend said he'd told people I was emotionally distant, that I'd been hard to read, that he'd felt alone even when we were together. I listened without defending myself. There's something freeing about letting people believe whatever version of you makes sense to them. Arguing only ties you back to a story you've already exited. The ex-girlfriend faded faster. At first there were posts, vague, defiant, quotes about resilience, about rebuilding, about cutting toxic people out of your life. Then less activity, then nothing. Apparently, couch surfing wears out its welcome when gratitude never arrives. One friend hinted she'd burned through 3 places in 2 months. Another said she'd tried to stay just a few weeks, somewhere else too. Patterns repeat when they're never examined. As for the things left behind in the apartment, furniture, boxes, odds and ends, the landlord had them cleared out after the deadline. Donated what he could. Tossed the rest. I didn't ask for details. Those objects belonged to a version of my life that no longer needed documentation. In my new studio, everything had a place. Not because I forced order, but because there was less to manage when I stopped carrying other people's weight. I learned what silence actually sounds like when it isn't filled with tension. I learned how restful sleep can be when no part of you is on guard. I learned that peace isn't dramatic. It's almost boring. And that's the point. One evening, as I was unpacking the last box from storage, I found an old notebook. Wedding notes, guest lists, color palettes, a life planned in careful handwriting. I flipped through it slowly, then closed it. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like acknowledgement. I didn't fail. I didn't lose. I didn't abandon anyone. I chose not to stay where I was no longer considered. And that choice, quiet, uncelebrated, firm, changed everything. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not about revenge or winning or proving anything. It's this: when someone asks you to shrink so they can feel generous, when your discomfort is treated as an inconvenience, when love is measured by how much you're willing to tolerate, pay attention. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you finally cared enough about yourself. And sometimes that's the bravest ending there is. There's a strange moment that comes after chaos ends. Not relief exactly, not closure, just the quiet realization that no one is waiting for you to explain yourself anymore. That moment came for me on an ordinary Tuesday. I was standing in line at the grocery store in my neighborhood now, holding a basket with exactly what I needed and nothing extra. No one texting me to pick up something they forgot. No one asking if I could cover it this time. No one hovering in my emotional peripheral vision. Just me, existing, unremarkable, free. I moved fully into my studio that week. The last box from storage sat unopened in the corner for days before I finally dealt with it. Inside were the remnants of a future that never happened. Wedding favors, a binder labeled vendors, a stack of envelopes I'd never mailed. I didn't open them one by one. I recycled the whole box. Not angrily, not ceremoniously, just efficiently. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Something simple. Ate at the counter, washed the dish immediately after. No resentment simmering underneath the routine. No tally being kept. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't thought about Robert all day. Not his choices, not his mother's accusations, not the ex-girlfriend, or the eviction, or the rewritten versions of me floating around in other people's conversations. I hadn't been trying not to think about him. I just hadn't. The world hadn't collapsed because I walked away. It had reorganized. I heard later, through the thinnest thread of acquaintance, that Robert was dating again, that he told people he was finally with someone who understands him, that his family approved. I smiled when I heard that, not because I wished him well, not because I wished him harm, because it confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't lost a partner. He'd lost a buffer. Someone else would now absorb what I once did, and maybe she'd last longer, maybe not. Either way, it was no longer my lesson to repeat. As for me, I didn't rush into anything new. I learned how to sit with discomfort without solving it, how to enjoy companionship without merging identities, how to say no without rehearsing a justification first. The engagement ring money stayed in savings. The wedding deposits remained gone. Both facts stopped hurting somewhere along the way. They were tuition. Here's the truth I don't soften anymore. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. Generosity that costs only one person isn't generosity. And staying silent to keep the peace doesn't make you kind. It makes you invisible. I didn't leave dramatically. I didn't scream or expose or destroy. I stepped aside. And I let everyone reveal exactly who they were without my intervention. If you're reading this and wondering whether you should stay, compromise more, explain yourself better, ask yourself one thing. If you stopped holding everything together, who would still stand? That answer tells you everything.